Hey everyone, it's Christopher, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make your very own set of troll horns! Yay! These are the horns that are for Mulin or Nepeta or the Disciple, or your own OC. And this is really the second time I've made horns. So the first time I was going to make a tutorial, but I was still figuring stuff out. So I've come up with a way that I think will create a very strong and durable kind of horn. The last pair I made was about 8 months ago, and they still are great. They still have held up. I've worn them quite a few times, and they haven't broken or anything. So let's get started. So the materials you're going to need are Model Magic or some other air-dry clay, a headband to attach your horns to, and if you get a wider headband, it'll be more stable. Paints in the colors that you want to paint your horns. Some sticks or skewers to make up the structure of the horns. Some tape to hold everything together temporarily. Some wire which will hold the horns together and also to the headband. Tinfoil, which is going to make up the main bulk of the horns. Hot glue to hold everything together. And finally a template so that you can figure out what you're doing and work on paper first. The first thing I did was use the stencil as a guide for the sticks and the horns, and then cut them to size. The sticks are going to be the main structure for the horns, and they're going to help them to keep their shape. I then twisted wire around the base of each stick to attach it to the headband. Get the wire as close as possible to the bottom of the stick without the wire falling off or anything. I glued the wire down here, but you might want to wait till later in case you need to readjust the size. I actually had to resize the sticks twice while making this pair of horns. Here I'm just gluing the tops of the sticks together. I actually glued it narrower than the template because I wanted to add later bulk with the foil and clay instead of having it with the sticks and then having it be too large later. Now you can make the second framework, and definitely make sure that they're the same length or size or whatever. I did trim down one quite a bit. From here you can start to wire the framework to the headband. This is so you can try out their placement and make sure you're happy with where they are and their size and shape. For me, these horns were way too sideways. They stuck out too much. They didn't look like the ears that Nepeta is supposed to have. So I actually had to take them off and cut off part of one of the sticks, the one closer to the middle, so that it would sit more vertically on my head and more vertically on the headband, as you can see here. Once you've wired on your horns, it's always a good idea to try them on to see the placement on your head and to make sure you're happy with it. Especially make sure that they're even. Like, make sure that one's not more slanted than the other one. Now we're going to start adding tinfoil, which is the main core of the horns, so that you don't have to waste clay on parts that won't be seen. Really try to build the horn outwards and not just front and back to give it some dimension. I also found it easier to put the tinfoil down in small pieces instead of just trying to add a bunch all at once. Here I also added some over the edge just to kind of even it out and build it more out sideways. You can glue the tinfoil down to help it stick better, but be very, very careful because the foil will get very hot from the glue. Like, I couldn't touch it for very long at all. I just had to hold it by the very edges because it was so hot. Now it's time to permanently wire the horns to the headband. Keep the wire pretty close to the base of the horn and then glue it down. Make sure that you're really sure what you want your horns to be. Make sure that they're in the correct position before you do this, because once you've glued them down, it's really hard to go back. Like, you could cut off the wire from the glue, but it would be really difficult and it might ruin your horns in the process. Now it's finally time to add the clay. So the first thing I did was I kind of mushed the clay around and rolled it out, which I think helps get rid of a lot of the air bubbles so that it'll be smoother on the horn. Then you just pat it down around the horn and smooth it out. Make sure to really smooth out all the creases because once it starts to dry, it might start to crack along those creases. I also went underneath the headband to help attach the horn even better. Here I'm adding another piece and I'm just smoothing it down quite a bit. This is also your chance to bulk the horns up on the front and back to make sure that it has like the right horn shape and the right kind of dimension to it. And this is about what your horns will look like when you're done adding the clay. Now it's just time to let them dry. To let my horns dry, I hung mine on my curtain rod. However, if you've got a bigger pair of horns, that might not work. You could prop them up or lie them down flat. So you can start painting your horns once they're dry. I let mine dry for 2 or so days before I started painting them, and they weren't actually completely dry. When I started, they were still kind of squishy, but they were dry enough on the outside, so I figured it was okay to start. Here I'm just mixing up the colors a little bit because I didn't like the colors that I had in the bottle. I wanted more of a yellowy orange and then an orangey red instead of straight up red, orange, yellow. And now I'm just painting the horns. Pretty basic stuff. Like, you can paint them however you want. For mine, I ended up blending mine quite a bit, so the colors are all pretty blended out, but you can really paint them however you want. One thing I would suggest, it's not what I'm doing, but I'd suggest it anyway because I figured this out, is paint one side and then the other so that you don't have to hold it up the whole time, because that was really hard for me to do. Just like paint one side and then put it down. So like I put it down here, and then when I picked it up later, there was a mark on the work surface. So just like paint one side and then the other. We are done! Yay! Look how cute they are. Ready to be Mulin or the Disciple or Nepeta. So one thing I do want to say about these horns is that over time they will start to crack. Like this pair I've had for over 8 months. Made it a while ago, and you can see the foam is just starting to clay. It's just starting to crack. That's just because since it's an air dry clay, it keeps drying, and it also seems to be shrinking. I'm not really sure why. The reason the horns aren't falling apart is because of the stick core I put inside, but it does start to look kind of ugly. If that's not the look you're going for, you can fix it. One of the ways you can do this is by taking a little bit of Model Magic and putting it into the cracks, like so. Just kind of feed it along in the cracks. Pinch it in, and then you can wait for it to dry and then paint over it. Kind of like that, except better because I don't have to do it facing away from me. Another way you could do this is by using hot glue, which would definitely be easier to get into the cracks, but it's also not opaque or solid looking, so you'd have to cover it with something else that's more solid, like white paint or Model Magic on top, just so that when you paint over it, you don't see the clear glue underneath. A couple other things I want to say about these horns is that obviously depending on the type of horn, the way you're going to make it is different. So for these, I didn't actually use the tinfoil as a base. I just went straight to the Model Magic because they're thin enough that the tinfoil wasn't really necessary. I actually tried it at first, but it really wasn't helping. So that's one way you don't need to do it. Also for these, I'd recommend using other sticks or something here to help connect it, or at least a wire inside the clay in here just to help keep it connected. And you also, depending on the size of a headband you use, you don't have to put the clay through underneath. Here is just some paper which is covering up the wires, so I wired it down, and you can see here the base of the horns is on the top, it doesn't wrap underneath.